Hey, listener, ready to really dive deep?
Oh, yeah.
Today, we're tackling Kant, Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason.
He'd work.
No kidding. But don't worry, we've got a really good translation to work with, plus Kant's original prefaces and a super in-depth intro. Should make things a bit easier, hopefully.
I think so, yeah.
So our mission,
Yeah, what are we doing here?
well, we're going to uncover the core argument of this famously dense work. See if we can figure out what made Kant's approach so revolutionary. And most importantly, why anyone should care.
Right.
So to help us with all this, we've got our expert.
Well, it's funny. When you think about Kant, what makes him so interesting is that he wasn't just kind of building a philosophical system all alone, like in a vacuum.
Right.
He was responding to like a major crisis in philosophy at the time.
Okay.
Like imagine this philosophical tug of war. You got these two sides.
Okay.
The dogmatists.
Okay.
Who thought we could know things like with absolute certainty. And then you've got the skeptics.
Okay.
And they doubted we could know anything for sure at all.
So Kant was in the middle trying to walk this line between I know everything and I know nothing.
Exactly. He was trying for that sweet spot, a critical approach, defending reason and scientific knowledge, but also realizing we can't know everything for sure.
Yeah, that's a pretty ambitious, well, it's an ambitious goal for sure.
Yeah.
So how did he even start to tackle all of this in the critique? I mean, this book is huge, right?
It's a monster of a book.
Yeah.
But there's a method to all the madness.
Okay.
Think of it like a really carefully built building. The first part, the doctrine of elements, that's like the foundation.
The foundation of his theory of knowledge.
Exact.
Okay, so we've got the foundation. What comes next?
Next, we go to the transcendental aesthetic. And this is where things get really interesting, like super trippy.
Trippy how?
Kant looks at our intuitions of space and time, not as properties of the objects themselves, but as ways that our minds, they structure our experience. So imagine you're looking at the world, but you've got these philosophical sunglasses permanently attached.
Right.
Those lenses, those are space and time, and they're shaping how you see everything.
So he's not saying the external world is an illusion, just that we can only access it through these lenses of space and time.
Yes, that's exactly it. And that leads us to this really important idea, transcendental idealism. He's saying we can only truly know the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us, not the noumenal world, like the world of things in themselves.
Whoa, okay. That's a lot to take in. So then we move from the aesthetic to the transcendental logic, which I'm guessing gets even more complex.
You could say that.
Yeah.
So here we're exploring how we use concepts to understand our experience.
Okay.
This is where we get Kant's famous categories of the understanding.
Categories?
Yeah, things like substance, causality, community. He thinks these are absolutely essential for us to have any experience at all. We can't even have an experience without them.
Hold on. He's not just saying these categories are random ideas.
No.
He's actually trying to prove they apply to everything we experience.
You got it. He's trying to show these categories are a priori, which means, it means they exist independently of experience. It's a really dense section. It's known as the transcendental deduction. But here's what's important. Kant's arguing that our minds aren't just passively absorbing information. They're actively structuring our reality through these categories. It's we're not just watching the movie, we're helping write the script.
Wow. That's a lot to think about. If he's right about this, it really changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does. And actually, that's just the start. Next, we're going to get into the transcendental dialectic. This is where Kant really takes on traditional metaphysics. He's looking at these big questions and shows us the limits of pure reason when it tries to go beyond experience. So listener, buckle up. This is where things get really exciting.
Okay, I'm ready, I think.
Yeah.
But before we get too far into those really, really big metaphysical questions, maybe we should pause here for a sec. Just let all this sink in a bit. So listener, what stands out to you so far? What questions are you thinking about? Take a moment to think about that, and we'll be right back to keep going with our deep dive into Kant's revolutionary critique of pure reason. Okay, listener, are you ready to jump back in?
Let's do it.
We've done the groundwork, explored space and time, those categories.
Right.
Now it's time to really confront those big questions, the metaphysical ones.
Yeah, the ones that have always been there.
Yeah, and that's where the transcendental dialectic comes in, right?
Yeah, Kant's turning his critical eye towards all that traditional metaphysics. Those big philosophical systems trying to explain it all. The ultimate nature of reality, the soul God, free will.
So he's taking on those big thinkers, the ones who think they have all the answers.
He's not afraid to,
Yeah.
he's not afraid to challenge them. Kant says, when reason tries to operate without experience, when it goes beyond what we can actually observe and know,
Yeah.
well, it gets tangled up.
Tangled up in what?
Illusions and contradictions.
So he's saying reason, our best tool for understanding, can actually lead us in the wrong direction.
It's a real paradox, isn't it? Reason can be a source of error if we're not careful.
And this is where he talks about psychology, cosmology, and theology.
Those are the big three, yeah.
Yeah.
Psychology dealing with the soul, cosmology, the whole universe, and then theology, God.
Yeah, those are some pretty big topics.
They really are.
So those are the ideas of pure reason that he talks about.
Hmm?
The soul, the cosmos, and God.
Yeah, he looks at those classic arguments,
Yeah.
The ones philosophers have always used to prove these things exist. And Kant shows how when pure reason goes beyond experience, well, it creates arguments that might sound good, but they fall apart when you really look at them closely.
This is where we get those antinomies, those arguments that seem logical but lead to totally opposite conclusions.
Yeah, it can make your head spin trying to think about it.
It really can. So what's the answer? Does Kant just give up and say we can't know anything about these things?
He doesn't give up. This transcendental dialectic isn't just him, being negative.
Right.
It's also a way of redefining what reason is for in philosophy.
Okay.
Kant says reason has an important role to play, but it has to stay within the limits of possible experience. He's drawing a line saying this is what we can know and this is what we can't.
So he's setting boundaries, but he's also opening up new ways of understanding within those limits.
That's it exactly. It's a new perspective, you could say.
This reminds me of what you said before about Kant's Copernican revelation in philosophy. He's not just changing a few things here and there, he's changing how we think about knowledge and reality.
That's a great point. Just like Copernicus changed how we see the universe by moving the focus from Earth to the sun,
Yeah.
Kant's changing philosophy by moving the focus from the object of knowledge to the subject, the knower. He's saying the way our minds are structured shapes how we experience everything.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that affects everything, not just philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Science, ethics, art, politics. Kant's critique is like this earthquake, and we're still feeling the effects today.
So we've got the structure of the book, the key concepts, and even its temporal impact. But we haven't talked about Kant himself.
Yeah.
You said he was a creature of habit with a really strict routine, like people could set their clocks by him.
It's a funny detail, but it tells you a lot about him.
Like what?
He was a very rigorous thinker.
Okay.
Very careful, paid attention to all the details, totally dedicated to reason and order.
So you're saying there's a link between his life and his philosophy?
Oh, for sure. That need for structure, it's everywhere in the critique. It's such a carefully put together work, every part fitting perfectly into the whole.
Speaking of details, there's this quote from Kant I really like.
Oh yeah, which one?
Thoughts without content are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind. It's a pretty good one, isn't it?
It's a great quote, and it sums up one of Kant's main ideas.
Okay.
He's pointing out how important it is to have both sensibility, which gives us that raw data from our senses. What we see here, touch all that.
Right.
And understanding, which gives us the concepts we need to make sense of all that data.
So it's like having all the parts for a cake, but no recipe.
That's a great way to put it.
The ingredients are the intuitions, but you need the recipe, the concepts to do anything with them.
Without concepts, our intuitions would just be a mess of feelings. And without intuitions, our concepts would just be empty ideas.
I see.
For Kant, knowledge comes from both of these working together.
That makes sense. And this takes us back to those categories we talked about before, those basic concepts that shape how we experience things.
Exactly. They're like our essential tools, the lenses we use to see the world.
Okay, so we've talked about intuitions, concepts, categories.
Yeah.
But there's one more thing we need to talk about. The thing in itself, that mysterious noumenon.
Ah, yes, the thing in itself. One of the most mysterious parts of Kant's philosophy.
And it leads to some pretty big questions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If we can't ever know the thing in itself, what does that mean for reality? Are we stuck in a world of appearances?
It really makes you question everything.
It does. But before we go too far down that road, I think we should acknowledge we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
Listener, we've explored some of the most complex ideas in philosophy.
Yeah, it's not easy.
But it's worth it, isn't it? Kant really pushes us to think critically about our own assumptions, about the limits of what we can know, and about the really big questions about reality and our place in the universe.
It's what makes philosophy so interesting.
It is. So listener, are you ready for the final part of our Kant exploration? We're going to look at those implications of the thing in itself and finish our deep dive with some final thoughts. Stay with us. Okay, listener, we're back. Last part of our Kant journey.
Yeah, the grand finale.
We've covered so much already. The foundations of his philosophy, space and time, the categories, even metaphysics.
Right, the big stuff.
But now, we're facing the biggest mystery of all. The thing in itself.
It's the one that really keeps philosophers up at night, doesn't it?
Yeah, if we can only know the world as it appears to us, not as it really is, are we like stuck, trapped in our own little world?
That's the question, isn't it? If all we know are appearances, what does that even mean for, well, for reality, for how we understand ourselves, for meaning in life?
Yeah, it's almost like too much to think about. So does Kant just leave us hanging with all these questions and no answers?
Not quite. And this is where things get really interesting. Kant says, even though we can't know the thing in itself, like theoretically, we can kind of know it practically.
Practically.
Through our moral experience.
Okay.
It's about how we act in the world.
So this is where his idea of the categorical imperative comes in. That we should only act according to rules we could make universal.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If our minds are shaping our reality, like Kant says, then we have a responsibility to use our reason the right way.
Ethically.
Ethically, critically, carefully. And the categorical imperative is like, well, it's a guide for that. It helps us align our actions with a moral law that goes beyond our own individual experience.
So even though we can't know everything about the world theoretically, we're not limited in how we can act morally.
That's the idea. For Kant, our moral actions, they have a kind of objective reality. It's like they go beyond appearances.
Okay.
When we act morally, we're not just following our feelings.
We're connecting to something bigger.
Exactly.
So it's like our moral choices let us see past the surface. Like we connect with a deeper reality based on reason and freedom.
That's a great way to put it. And it reminds us that Kant, even though his philosophy is complex, it's really about how we live our lives, how we treat each other, how we find meaning.
Yeah. It's like he's saying, we may not know all the secrets of the universe, but we can still choose to be good.
And that's a message that still matters today.
It really does. So listener, as we finish our deep dive into Kant's critique of pure reason, think about this. If our moral actions can show us something beyond our normal perception, what does that mean for you? What choices will you make? What kind of person do you want to be? We hope this exploration has made you curious, challenged your thinking, and maybe even inspired you to do some philosophical exploring of your own.
Because that's what Kant would have wanted us to do.
A big thank you to our expert for making Kant a little bit easier to understand, and to you, listener, for joining us. Keep asking those big questions and keep searching for those deeper truths. We'll see you next time.